Hello, my friends, and welcome to a very special episode of the Living Divinely podcast. I am incredibly excited to share a new episode with you guys. And I know what you're thinking. I know what you guys are thinking. Where has this lady been? And I've been away for good reason. I have really wanted to hone in on my brand, my messaging, and really just getting my ducks in order for 2026. And then also too, I've been on a very intentional healing journey that has mattered a little bit more than being public facing and sharing. And I love that I mentioned that because it's kind of a good segue into today's episode, because I've really been focusing on being intentional about being present, but being present in a way that carries value or pours into my community and my audience. And I don't think I would have been able to fully do that being in the space that I was in earlier this year. Not saying that I'm currently not actively healing. I'm not saying that. I'm still present in my healing journey, but I feel better about where I am, the direction that I'm moving in. I feel a little bit more stable on all levels, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And so that's why I felt comfortable with recording an episode. I also think it was really, really important for me to leverage my platform to talk about this. And today we are going to talk about the art of revealing just enough and how to create content and share your story without oversharing. And with that said, let's get into today's episode. So initially, the episode that I'm recording today was only intended to be a blog post. And over the weekend, it was like a Sunday morning, I sat down and started this idea of this blog post came into my head. And so I started sitting down, drafting out the outline, went through the outline, felt really good about it. I'm like, okay, on my to-do list, Monday, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to work through it. I literally sat down in my computer. I wrote a little bit, but not enough to put a dent in the work. So then the next day, come in and sit down, I was determined. I'm like, you're going to figure it out. You're going to get it together. Started writing, get through the entire post. And then instantly something clicked into my head and was like, this should be more than what it is. This should also be a podcast episode. And in the past, I have written blog content and then also read those blog posts for the podcast, just making it easier for y'all, because sometimes y'all don't like to sit down and read. And it's better for you guys to listen to what I have to say as opposed to sitting and reading it. Had I not spent the time with this post, I would have never determined that it was supposed to be more than what it was. And so I'm happy that we made it here today. Working through this content and working through this post had me thinking a lot about all the older versions of myself when I first started my platform and started creating, in that version of myself that used to create and believed that the only way to be relatable to my audience was to be overly transparent. And boy, was I wrong. I feel like over the years, as it's become increasingly popular to have a platform, to go viral, to have brand partnerships and all the things, the internet has conditioned many of us to think that vulnerability equates to visibility, and hypervisibility equates or can equate to impact. Every time that I have shared something, even remotely personal, the content has performed, and it has performed well. The likes flood in, the comments pour out, and the immediate and almost constant, thank you for sharing this. Thank you for being so transparent. All of those messages flood in, and in those moments, they feel very affirming. I think that it got to a point that I even eventually convinced myself that what I was doing was a sense of community building, even though it was often just confirmation bias disguised as connection. A lot of the reason why I opt out of re-engaging or resharing a lot of my old work is not that I want to forget about it because it was bad, because I think every artist and creative has that era of content where they're just like, I'd rather not. But I don't think any artist or creative has anything bad. I think things can be refined and repurposed and reused all the time. But I choose not to go back to any of my earlier content for the simple fact that a lot of it was rooted in oversharing. And I thought that I was building community and connection at that time, but I literally was just oversharing. And if there is a way to trauma bond virtually or trauma bond, that's what I was doing. And I cringe at that. I think eventually I learned a very hard truth. And that truth is that there is a difference between being seen and being overly exposed. I remember there was a point where I was sitting on my couch and I was drafting a caption about being burnt out. I was juggling the demands of this job that I was working. I was exhausted. I was stretched thin, was physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally depleted. And as I'm writing this caption, I feel good about it in the moment. Then I go back and I reread that caption, and something felt off. Something felt very misaligned. The story itself, the story that I was sharing in the caption, was honest. The intention behind it and the reason why I wanted to share it was not honest at all. I wasn't trying to connect. I didn't want to connect. I wanted someone online to validate how I was feeling in that moment. I wanted people online to validate how overwhelmed I felt and reassured that I deserved to feel that way. That realization in the moment is what stopped me dead in my tracks. It really stopped me from sharing in that moment. And it really became clear for me that storytelling builds your brand, but oversharing can be the thing that drains it. And the line between the two is much thinner than most of us actually realize. I want to spend a brief moment just talking about why I personally believe we tend to overshare online. I think that before we can even talk about how to storytell and how to share and do it well, we have to be honest about why we tend to overshare in the first place. When people overshare online, it is usually rooted in something deeper than just wanting to get a story out. Sometimes it is an attempt or intent to build trust. Sometimes it is the desire to show that we are human and having a human experience. Other times it's an unspoken feeling that if we don't reveal enough, our content won't land or perform in the way that we want. I think a great example of this is seeing the trend of a lot of people leveraging their TikToks to share personal experiences about horrific marriages and personal relationships, and seeing the trend of so many people following behind that exact content frame, that exact blueprint, and wanting to create a viral moment based on what someone else overshared. It's a perfect example. But most of oversharing as we know it isn't about transparency at all. It's rooted in fear. It's fear of irrelevance, fear of being misunderstood or becoming invisible, fear of not going viral or having your big break and having that big viral moment. I think the reality is storytelling isn't just about spilling the tea or sharing something online. or throwing everything out to your audience or your timeline. It's about curation. It's about choosing the moments that inspire others, choosing to share things that move your message forward rather than unloading the details of your personal life in real time. When you are building a brand, whether it be personal or business, your story becomes your positioning. But positioning is something that requires discernment. If everything matters, then nothing does. So today I want to share a few tips with you guys, a few tips that will help you share your story in a way that builds connection, strengthens your authority, and reinforces your brand identity without you having to sacrifice your emotional boundaries. The first thing is choosing to lead with a message and not a memory. This is where intentional storytelling starts for a lot of people. And before you share anything personal, I want to challenge you to pause and ask yourself what you want the person who is reading or watching to take away from the story that you're sharing. What is the insight, the lesson, or a shift that you are offering? The question isn't what happened to me. It's why does this matter to the other person on the other end? When your message guides your story, sharing becomes intentional rather than impulsive. You're never posting to be understood. You are posting to be useful. You want to be a resource to your audience, and your audience should always walk away with a new mindset, a new frame of thinking, never a front row seat to your unprocessed emotions. The second thing is sharing from a healed perspective and not the height of the experience. Timing is such an important concept when it comes to storytelling, and timing matters just as much as the story itself. Brands with longevity are not built on crisis updates. They are built on lived experiences that have been processed, that are very well understood and integrated into the brand. When you speak from the height of an unprocessed moment, the audience naturally shifts into the role of your emotional caretaker. When you share from a place of clarity and integration, the audience then becomes a student. That shift happens only when you've had the time to sit with the experience, extract the insight from that experience, and let the emotional charge settle. That's the space where storytelling becomes grounded. It becomes wise and intentional and emotionally intelligent. Next is defining your personal boundaries before you ever hit send or post on Beyonce, Giselle Knowles Carter internet. This is where you begin to take back creative control over everything that you create. Your brand deserves the same clarity of boundaries as your personal life. When you create, I want you to start asking yourself which stories are sacred to you, which stories are private but still are shareable, but sharing them with intention. And then thinking about which stories of yours truly align with the message that you're building or trying to convey, and which ones are not relevant to your work at all. Also thinking about which stories still need to be lived with or lived in and held and understood a little bit more before they can be shared publicly. This is how you keep your power. This is how your story becomes a tool that you use, and you're using it intentionally rather than using it as something that you unravel for an audience that hasn't earned full access to you yet. Next is building a story bank that is anchored in themes, not traumas. This is how you can begin to build a sustainable storytelling practice instead of reactive content. You do not need to expose the most painful experiences of your life to build a compelling personal brand. Instead, I want you to start thinking about what it could look like to create a story bank around the themes that define your work. Maybe it's identity, creativity, leadership, pivoting, self-trust, navigating transitions, intentional living, emotional wellness. Spoiler alert, those are all the things that my work is rooted in. But for each theme, I want you to write down a few stories or moments that have shaped your understanding. These can be reflections, conversations, small turning points, client experiences with your audience online, childhood memories, or mistakes that have taught you something meaningful. This is what keeps your storytelling structured and intentional rather than reactive or emotionally heavy. One of my favorite rules and something that I live by is using the 2-lens rule for every story that you share. The 2-lens rule is what keeps your storytelling aligned with both your humanity and your brand. Every piece of storytelling should pass through 2 filters. The first is the human lens. Is the story real? Is it an actual lived experience? Is it intentional? And is it ready to be shared? The second is the brand lens. Does this story support your messaging? Does it reinforce your positioning or create clarity or transformation for your audience? If it satisfies both, then it's likely a story that is ready to be shared. If it only satisfies one or none of the two, it is something that needs more time and needs to be refined before you decide to publish it online. Then I want you to think about telling the story and then teaching from it. This is where your authority lives, but then also where your authority becomes undeniable. Once you share the personal moment, it transitions that personal moment into something meaningful. What did the experience teach you? What did it reveal about alignment? What did it reveal about you, your leadership, identity, or creativity? How do you help people, whether it be clients or your online audience, navigate this now? The story becomes a doorway into your work, not the entirety of your message. One thing that I absolutely live by and will always swear by and will remind you until I'm blue in the face is leaving something for yourself. Leaving something for your real life. You are allowed to protect the pieces of your life that matter the most. The more visible you become, the more essential it becomes to protect those personal moments of your everyday life. Not every emotion or experience is ready for public consumption. Not every breakthrough or personal moment requires public commentary. Not every personal experience should become content. Hard truth, but a fact. Some moments are meant to be kept personal, kept close. Some belong only to your journal, and some belong to your inner circle, your tribe, your community. You can absolutely build a powerful, respected brand and still preserve a private life that belongs to you and you only. That is what keeps the brand emotionally sustainable. You also want to focus on making your stories about insight, not identity. This is actually the difference between oversharing and intentional storytelling. When you tell a story, the goal isn't to prove who you are. It is to demonstrate what you've learned. Oversharing is rooted in identity. Here is what I'm going through. This is what life has took me through. Storytelling is rooted in insight. Here is what this experience taught me, and I'm sharing this because I want you to learn the same things. I have gone through this to help you when you are going through this, or to help you navigate this so you don't make the same mistakes that I have made. The first of these drains you. The second of these two elevates you and elevates your audience as well. Lastly is building a framework. How do you put all of this together in a simple framework? I want to preface this before I continue. I just want to say that the purpose of me sharing all of this is to give you the tools that you need to storytell and do so in a way that is intentional and encouraging and inspiring, that doesn't and also doesn't require you to sacrifice yourself in the process. Following this framework, when you create or as you create, the desire to overshare naturally falls away in that process. The formula that I have used for years is something that I now use with my clients who are thought leaders, creatives, founders. It is a very simple but effective formula. And that formula is to begin with the message, select a moment that illustrates the message, and share only the emotional truth that supports the message. Then you offer your insight or a teaching moment and close with a point of clarity or a question for your audience to reflect on. When you approach storytelling in this way, you no longer have the space to overshare, because now that you're creating with this framework in mind, that framework in a lot of ways creates a boundary in your work. And everything that you are sharing that is rooted in this framework is now rooted in intention. I want to close this episode with this reminder, and I want you to carry this with you. You do not owe the internet your whole life in order to build a brand. In a world where visibility feels like currency, discernment is your superpower. Your story is enough. You are enough. You do not need to overexpose the personal happenings of your life and overexpose your family in order to gain visibility and notoriety. That's not how you build community. You simply need to show up with a sense of clarity, a sense of purpose, intention, and emotional intelligence. When you do that and you do it consistently, you realize that the magic was never in the process or desire to overshare. It was always in the authenticity that you choose to tell, the truth that you choose to tell, thoughtfully, intentionally, and purposefully. I want to thank you all for being here today and tuning into this very special episode of the Living Divinely podcast. And also, thank you for allowing this space and me to be a part of your journey. If today's episode inspired you and moved you in any kind of way, I want to encourage you to share it with someone else who is also on their journey to becoming. You can follow the Living Divinely podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and join the conversation on Instagram and TikTok at Living Divinely. Until next time, stay rooted in your truth and refined by your own design.